global seafood company. So I'm a human rights manager. So on our Thai union, we have a team dedicated to sustainable development. So one part of sustainable development is about taking care of workers that work for your company and also work for your suppliers. And the other part of our sustainability program, but not really focused on the top today, is around environmental sustainability. So you think about seafood, the issue of IUU fishery, plastics waste in the ocean, that's part of environmental aspect of our sustainability work. So I want to keep this kind of informal, so if anyone has a question, just please feel free to interrupt me and ask me at any time. So I just want to talk a bit about what Thai Union has done concretely to fight against modern slavery and promote labor rights. So just to start introducing our company, so you have a background. You know all about seafood industry in Thailand and how that is being perceived in new stakeholders, various stakeholders that's really rife with human rights views. And we are in that spot. Thai Union is a seafood company. We are a global company. We started in Thailand about 40 years ago. And then since then, we acquired new business. We grew organically abroad. So example of product is canned tuna, frozen shrimp. Pet food is also part of our product because a lot of seafood go into pet food, like cat and dog food. So just as I mentioned, we're a global company, and indeed our footprint is also very global. A lot of factories here in Thailand, mostly in Samut Sakhon and Songkhla, but also in other continents, in the US, several ones in Europe, two in Africa, Seychelles and Ghana. So these are our factories that we own and process seafood. We are not fishery company, which means we don't actually own any fishing boats, fishing vessels. Those are our suppliers. So we got a lot of misunderstanding, like, how do you employ workers on the fishing vessels? The answer is, those are not our workers, but we have a program in place to make sure that the workers who work for our suppliers are taken care of in terms of safe and equal labor. Globally, we have about 50,000 employees. So that's a lot of people. Majority of workers are actually in Thailand. And if you're talking about people who work in our factories, large majority are migrant workers from Cambodia and Myanmar. So we have several locations. Our supply chain is also very complex and diverse. So on one hand, we have fishery, so people, fishing vessels that supply to us. Also, we have farm shrimp because we also in shrimp business. So shrimp aggregators, so these are like traders, and also shrimp farmers are part of the supply chain. And then you also have other categories of products. Because we are food companies, we also source a lot of non-seafood raw materials. So like rice, other things. So globally, supply chain is quite vast and very sophisticated. Just for tuna alone, we actually source tuna from pretty much all the key oceans around the world. Very few percentage of tuna that we source from are from Thailand. And actually, I think less than 10% of the fish that we source are caught in Thailand. So it's very global. Our mission, I want to talk this a bit about our company's mission because it linked to our efforts in sustainability. So we really want to be the industry, the seafood industry leading agent of change, making positive difference for consumers and the way the seafood industry is managed. So that also relates to our work in sustainability as well, and also on human rights and modern slavery, because we want to drive the change to help the industry address the problem of modern slavery. Of course, as a responsibility of our company, our team first goal is to eradicate, eliminate modern slavery, promote labor rights in our factories and in our immediate supply chain. But as you can see later, a lot of our effort is actually to drive the wider industry change through regulations, through partnership with NGOs and also competitors and customers. I'm not sure if all of you here are familiar with what is modern slavery, because that's the main subject of talk today. But as defined by our International Labour Organization and also in a key legislation of the UK government, the UK Modern Slavery Act, modern slavery is slavery, servitude, forced or compulsory labor and human trafficking. So the issue of forced labor is very key to the definition of modern slavery. So basically it's a situation where people are forced to work. They are not volunteer to work, they don't want to work, they are forced to work. And if they don't work, they might get penalized. There's like a threat that if you don't work, you won't. So again, it's, if you think about Thailand context, like slavery was, it exists in Thailand in the past, but it was, I think, abdicated like hundreds of years ago. But modern slavery is real. It's actually not just a problem for Thailand, but also globally. And if you think about modern slavery, the vulnerable populations of workers in Thailand that are could be prone to slavery, and as you can see in news media report, are migrant laborers. So, what are some examples of modern slavery practice? When you force workers to do overtime, work in your factories. If you don't do overtime, you might get fired or something. So that's force them to do work overtime. Another one really related to migrant labor is passport retention. So sometimes employer actually keep passports, work permits, or key identity documents of migrant workers with themselves, as opposed to allow workers to keep this. So what happened is workers really have no choice but to stay in the job and pretty much cannot leave the factories. Because if you leave the factory and sometimes you get checked, and you don't have ID document, then you can be treated as illegal migrant laborers. So that's kind of forcing them to be with the employers. And I think we see a lot of that kind of practice in fishery and some employers. Wage withholding, you don't pay workers. Maybe you say, you're going to pay them at the end of the year. So in the meantime, you have to work. Because if you don't work and leave, you're not going to get paid for the year. So that's sort of forced them to do that. So I'll just stop here. And any questions? Or if not, then I'll continue. Yes, please, Professor.
Forced overtime, is that?
Can you talk a little bit more about forced overtime? Because it sounds very different from the other two situations where, is it that, you could have a contract where you say that you have to work certain number of hours overtime if needed, otherwise that's your contract. So that's considered modern slavery as well?
I'm not sure, but I think by Thai law, OT, overtime hours, needs to always be voluntary. But what happened is some employers would say, there's a lot of demand from customer, you need to meet production target, please work with us. And because sometimes workers, they don't want to work, they don't want to do overtime for whatever reason, but they are forced to do overtime. There are two issues. There's one about excessive overtime. Excessive overtime is you, as a worker, you voluntary to do the work, but the hours are excessive by international standards.
On a related note, so how do you check? What's the way to check that it is post overtime or voluntary overtime? What's the documentation tool that it's post voluntary?
So in Thai Union, I'll talk about later about different measures that Thai Union as a company have in place. But one of the things you can do is you have to always request workers to sign that they voluntarily want to work overtime before they actually do overtime. Because then that serves as a proof for auditors, NGOs, and also for your management that there's no forced overtime hours.
I think talking about overtime in Thailand is just for 40 workers, I think mainly 40 workers, because for example, Myanmar and Cambodia people usually stay work longer than Thai people. Thai people, time come, they stop and go home usually straight. But now the people of Myanmar and Cambodia and the people usually work longer, I think. I think it depends on your Thai work, 40 work, I think. I think this you agree?
Yeah. So that's the issue of excessive overtime. So these two are different ones, but it could be like overlap. So sometimes if you pay workers poorly, then they feel pressure to do a lot of overtime because they don't get paid enough. Right? So if you pay below minimum wage, for example, then workers feel like they need to work overtime, although they might do that completely voluntarily. So excessive overtime, underpay is also issues that we take care of workers and it's part of our overtime. But if you're talking about forced overtime, that means workers don't do that work voluntarily. One more question.
I was wondering what's the percentage of modern slavery in Thailand? Is happening a lot.
To be honest, I don't know exact figure, but I can provide that for you. There are lots of reports out there. One is from the, I think there's international statistics on Global Slavery Index by the Walk Free Foundation and ILO. So they estimate, they have to estimate like the population that are subject or prone to modern slavery. But I would say it's very hard to get exact figures. You always have to estimate because the issue of forced labor sometimes can be very subtle. Because if you interview workers, they say they completely work voluntarily, right? But they might feel like if they say otherwise, and if the employers know, then they might get fired. So it's a very tricky situation. So now I want to talk specifically more about Thai Union's effort in this. So just to introduce you, we have our sustainability strategy that was launched a few years ago, and that's called Sea Change strategy. So this strategy looked at the issues of labor, of modern slavery, but also on environmental aspects as well. The overall goal is of the sea change is first the sea has to be sustainable now and for the future, because we are in seafood business. If there's no fish for us to catch, then there's no business for us. If there are issues of labor abuse at sea, then that's not sustainable for us. The second one, very relevant to the area that I work in, is the workers are safe. They're employed in safe condition. They are legally employed, not illegal labor, and empowered. when I say empower, that means they are empowered to negotiate, to raise issues with employers when they see the issue. So it's called the issue of worker voice, that workers have a voice to say to employers. On the third one, that's very specific to the fishing vessels, so that the vessels that we buy from have to be legal. So we're talking about the issue of illegal, unreported, unregulated fisheries, and have to operate responsibly. Just example, one of the initiatives that we just start on these areas is we found that some of the fishing gears are made from plastic and they are abandoned at sea. So this could be like broken fish nets. And that actually contribute a lot to the plastic in the oceans. So that's one initiative that we just start with organization called Coast Gear Initiative, Global Coast Gear Initiative. So these are the three objectives, and under these objectives we have 4 pillars of program. One, I want you to focus here is safe and legal labor, because the issue of modern slavery is part of this program. So we want to make sure that the workers, not just in our factories, but also those who work in our supply chain, have safe and legal employment. But how will you achieve that? Then that we focus on the next slides. So you might ask, like, how do we make sure that people in our factories and supply chain, which is really vast and complex, well taken care of? We have a structure in place, and this is based on the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. So first of all, business has 6 pillars. First, you have to have a basic commitment as a company. What is the basic commitment? What are the policies that you have on human rights? Secondly, you have a policy, but then you also have to assess the risk. What is the risk of modern slavery, other labor rights abuse that happen in your factories or supply chain? Because if you know there's one area that's higher risk, that means you need to put more attention, allocate more resources to those areas. Once you understand the risk, we need to do something to help prevent those labor rights abuse, modern slavery from happening to begin with. Like, it's better to prevent things from happening than to fix it later. But of course, with prevention already in place, sometimes we have to accept that issue of labor rights abuse, modern slavery can still take place with your best efforts. So you need effort to help detect what happened, right, to workers, whether there's incidents of modern slavery and labor rights abuse happen. Once you detect victims, you detect that incidents, then you have to do something to fix it. So this is part of remedy. And so these all go into cycle. Once you remedy, you have information, then you do assess the risk again. So it's done in cycle. And that's the 6th pillar on continuous monitoring and disclosure. So we are quite transparent about what we do on the areas of sustainability. We have annual sustainability report. We publish a statement in compliance with the UK Modern Slavery Act, which say certain companies of certain size that operate in the UK have to disclose what they have done to address modern slavery. And we have business in the UK, so we comply with that regulations. Any questions so far? Okay. Next one. So I'm gonna go by, one by one on the pillars. I think this one can go quite fast because it's quite, about policies. So again, this is based on the UN guiding principles, and then we have the strategy, which is sea change, what I just introduced, and then we have targets, what we want to achieve in the sea change. Interim policies, we already have human rights policy. The other important one is our business ethics. Labor code of conduct, that say, one of the things that the code of conduct say, we shall prohibit forced labor. the other things like no child labor, healthy and safe work environment, for example, fair wages, appropriate number of hours of work, for example. So that's part of the business ethics and labor code of conduct that guide us for how we employ our workers, but also our suppliers, tier 1 suppliers, which means our direct suppliers have to sign and acknowledge that code of conduct and commit to comply with those code of conduct. Then we have a vessel code of conduct that just came out last year. So this is a separate standards for fishing vessels based on global standards for how workers should be treated on fishing vessels. This one I'll just go quickly. So through our 4 years, since 2015, we have continuous risk assessment for what could be labor rights risk in our supply chains. So we have forced labor or modern slavery, child labor, excessive overtime, unhealthy and unsafe working conditions, and so on. Now I think some activities that we do to prevent. So we understand risk. Now let's talk more about actual activities on what we do to prevent those from happening. So the first one, we have ethical migrant recruitment policies. Any questions?
I have a question from the previous slide. Yeah, how can you come up with these 7 human rights issues?
Mm-hmm. So there are varieties of information source. For example, the latest round of risk assessment, we use public information. I think the data from Walk-Free Foundations on Global Slavery Index, that's the one that we use because it tells you, what kind of risk in countries, and also the other one's U.S. TIPS report. Trafficking in persons report. I think U.S. Department of Labor also have data on modern slavery and child labor risk, and even say, for this particular country, which are the products that are prone to modern slavery in their operations and supply chain. And then the other source is we look at audit information. So we have been doing social audits in the past of different supply chains. So we sort of have an idea what kind of non-compliance are found and so on. So varieties of information sources.
Did you launch the questionnaire for your employees all over the world?
Sorry, what question?
Did you launch the application, the questionnaire on human rights issues for your employees from all over the world?
So we have, I'm not sure which questionnaire you're talking about, but one of the things that we did to certain supply chain is we launched self-assessment questionnaires.
All right, supplier assessment.
Suppliers to gauge, assess what kind of practice they have in place. But of course that is followed by actual audit to verify that they actually comply.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, so this one more interesting, prevention, what we have done. So one of the things we found is, I say a lot of migrant workers in Thailand are from Cambodia and Myanmar. And in the past, we found a lot of high risk on, people could be taken on debt to pay excessive recruitment fee to their labor broker agents. So in 2016, we come up with a new policy that limits those amounts of the monies that workers have to pay. For example, workers have to pay for passport, work permit, but on the recruitment fee, Thai union commits to pay to the agents. So that reduces the amount that workers have to pay. And we also have oversight by NGO. In the Myanmar side, the NGO would come up and kind of scrutinize, look at our recruitment process, and verify that actually the labor agents and Thai union management comply to those policies. Other ones interesting is training for fishers on health and safety. So things like how do vessel operators can conduct CPR, have medical kits on board, because we found from previous audit that health and safety issues are key concerns on Thai fishing vessels. So we just did that this year. And then training on labor rights, making sure that the employees understand what their rights are. So that's on the prevention, and now you have detection. So you can't assume that with all your best efforts to prevent, bad things will not happen. That's why we have social audits. We audit ourselves, internal audits. So you have different factories in Thailand. You have one team of internal auditors go to check the compliance. But we also face third-party audits by some of our customers, like Costco, I think you mentioned is also one of customers, third-party standards. And then we audit our suppliers in different ways. For fishery suppliers, the third-party audit program began last year, and we are doing this again, happening I think this week or last week for Thai fishing boats. And international non-Thai boat, we also do that for our tuna fleets around the world. The shrimp farm, the farm shrimp, we also audit the shrimp aggregators, who's our direct supplier, but also tier 2 supplier, which is the farmers. So we start that part of the audit program as well. The other ways to detect what issue is, you have to empower workers to have a voice in the process, because sometimes the workers in a very large factories, new management may not have a full oversight and see everything that happens, especially in factories that have tens of thousands of workers. So you have to empower workers to have a voice to raise concern. So we have internal channels, grievance channels for workers to raise, like line applications, hotline. They are also welcome to contact outside NGOs. LPN and WRN, ISRA Institute are our partners in those. So the workers can call those NGOs, and the NGOs report issues to us. The other thing is very interesting is the Worker Welfare Committee. So you might know that I think by Thai regulation, if you are a company, factory of that employ 50 workers or more, you need to have a welfare committee that composed of workers' representatives. I think a lot of Thai factories already have those in place, but sometimes they can be quite dysfunctional. It's like Thai employees sometimes do that just to comply with the law. And what we found is that we need to strengthen those, because that empower worker voice. So we work with an NGO, MWRN. They help to come to our factories and promote the election of migrant workers, of Thai workers. So they become more interested in the Worker Welfare Committee and run as a candidate to take part in the welfare committees. So as a result of those interventions, we have more migrant workers as part of the welfare representative. Yes.
So just to be clear, those detection. No, what was the previous pillar? I'm sorry. Detection. Yeah. Just to be clear, is this just Thai union or is it your suppliers as well?
So suppliers as well, because we also conduct audits of suppliers.
I see.
And one of the things when we audit suppliers is that we audit them against our code of conduct standards. And one of the things in the code of conduct say that workers have a voice, have access to grievance channels. So we would check, for example, if there are factories of 50 workers or more, we would check that they have welfare committees. Right? Or when we audit sometimes suppliers, we ask their workers, like, can you comfortably raise issues with employers? Are you being threats if you raise issues and so on?
And these hotlines and line applications, they go to you or they go to the supplier? Like the hotlines that are set up for your suppliers, do the responses come to Thai Union or do they go to the suppliers?
That will go to suppliers.
I see.
We do have one confidential email in place that if the workers who work for our suppliers have concern and want to raise that, they can contact that email. But from our experience, it's better that the suppliers have their own channels in place because it's about employee and employer relations. But last resort, if workers who go to suppliers want to report to us, they can.
So, related question here. So, yeah, I'm actually in the middle of trying to influence the supplier to make these changes. And one of the challenges which we see in reality is that if you educate the employees too much, right, from a business owner perspective, their costs go up because they are whatever used to be an understanding kind of a thing has now to be counted. For example, just doing all the paperwork for all these standards is an additional cost. Then if you are telling them everything that okay, you have to decide, and then they are taking those holidays, that's an additional cost for them. So it tends to increase the cost significantly the higher and stricter the standards are. So what's the way to balance it, and what's the way to incentivize the employer to make sure that it's worth all of this?
Good questions. I think I saw a lot of those questions too from different audience in the past. Our preferred approach is to help our suppliers improve. So it's not like we tell them this is what they have to do, and if they can't do it on day one, we're gonna not do business with you. That's not a union approach. So for example, on the vessel code of conduct, when we start auditing suppliers, we found that a lot of boats don't have medical emergency kit, cannot comply with those. So one of the things we did mention is health and safety training. As part of those, we provide free medical kits to help them. Or the things that we might be looking into this year is when we start auditing the boat, the issues found about how workers have raising issues to the vessel owners or operators, or the contract they don't understand. One of the things we are looking at is, can we develop a cartoon version of the contract that will help workers understand these? Or can we share a template on grievance mechanisms so the suppliers, the owner of the boats, can just adopt those and use it for their own operations. So you have to help suppliers, and that's very important for us because we know that if we want to be industry leading or change, if we want to create real change in Thailand and globally, you can't just terminate those relationships. You have to work with those suppliers. I think the other things that we do is again we take care of workers in our operations and suppliers. But as I mentioned, we also kind of spearhead new initiative that could have promising effect for the wider industry. One of the things we do is digital traceability. So I think it's best for me to just show the video that describe about what this is. So I'm going to just show this.
As the trawler sets sail today, there is more to worry about than the size of the catch. Human rights, migrant and labor issues, environmental and climate change threats, and other sustainability concerns are at the forefront for responsible seafood businesses. Increasingly, sustainability depends on traceability, tracing the seafood from catch to consumption.
Consumers want their food to be traceable, and this is especially important in seafood. So for seafood, people want to know where the fish are caught, if the fishery is sustainable, and how the people are being treated who are catching it. Seafood sustainability and traceability are integrally linked. So we talk about traceability as being the backbone of our sustainability program.
Most vessels rely on paper-based systems, where boat captains record what they capture and when, along with approximate volumes, to help trace the catch. As opposed to a farm or factory, on a fishing boat, it's more difficult to provide digital connectivity. Many ethical and sustainable seafood companies still use paper-based systems to track at least part of their supply chain. Unfortunately, it's inefficient and prone to human error. To tackle the problem, Thai Union and Mars Pet Care, along with partners such as Inmarsat, launched a digital traceability pilot program in Thailand. Digital traceability in supply chains is a big step toward ensuring sustainability.
We've put satellite on a few different Thai fishing vessels, and the purpose of that is so that you can have connectivity at sea. What we're trying to do is introduce digital logbooks so that electronically and digitally we can capture that information to give a greater view of confidence as well as full supply chain traceability.
Teams were deployed to selected Thai fishing vessels to install Inmarsat's Fleet 1 terminals. This simple satellite system produces instant and accurate electronic data about everything from the size, location, and time of the catch to crew numbers, working hours, and conditions.
This is actually a new service that is designed especially for the fishing market. The Fleet 1 system consists of an antenna and a preloaded equipment. Just plug in the SIM card and go.
โปรแกรมมารีทัสจะสำคัญมากต่อเจ้าของเรือซึ่งเจ้าของเรือนะคะสามารถดูโปรแกรมนี้ได้เพื่อเป็นการติดตามเรือว่าตอนนี้เรืออยู่ตำแหน่งที่ไหนในส่วนของโปรแกรมนี้นะคะจะสามารถให้ผู้ใช้งานตรวจสอบข้อมูลย้อนกลับรวมไปถึงการทราบในส่วนของตำแหน่งที่ทำการจัดสัตว์น้ำประเภทของสัตว์น้ำที่ทำการประมง
The electronic catch data and real-time information help seafood companies, partners, and governments work to minimize illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. This better protects fisheries and the environment and helps uphold human rights, reducing supply chain risks for seafood companies.
Success for this pilot project could really mean a significant transformation in the seafood supply chain, because for the first time there will be connectivity at sea, and this not only for catch data and real-time information, but it will also give the opportunity to the workers at sea to connect with either their family on the land or possibly peers on other boats, but they won't have a voice.
vengono capire se non capire perché non ho potuto capire dove se non mi piace che non tolgo perché non ส่งรูปภาพได้ส่งเสียงได้แล้วก็คือแบบมีการพิมพ์แชทอะไรได้
Bagaimana tapi itu, teman-teman, cuma udah kumis saya di dunia mau mana, bagaimana tapi itu, cuma udah kumis aja, ni kuna las kata mati asal, saya di dunia mau.
As the fishing industry continues to evolve, there is increased hope this pilot project has the potential to not only improve traceability and transparency throughout Thai waters, but the greater fishing industry as well.
Many of the issues that we're finding in Thailand replicate themselves in other fishing communities around the world. So we hope that the trials that we're doing here will have ramifications in fishing industries globally.
Not only will it assure traceability, but it will also, more importantly, it will set a new standard from an environmental and social perspective for the seafood supply chain. And I truly believe that if successful, this could be transformational for the seafood industry overall.
So that's one of the pilot projects that we engage with our customers. and some partners on digital traceability. I think now coming to an end, I just want to share some lessons learned from Thai union work on fighting modern slavery. There's always room to improve. Right? And I'm talking about business here, not just seafood business, but any other business. But there's always something you can do to address issues of their use in your own operations, your own backyards, or further down the supply chains. So when I look at what Thai Union have done, when we start, like many years ago, it did not, come into like one structural program in place. Actually, the Sea Change program was in 2016. Human rights assessment started before that. The code of conduct that we started before that. And then we learn along the way, we make new partnership along the way, and we come up with new programs along the way. So as a business, you have to start somewhere. You have to do something first. You can't just not do something and say you need to come up with strategy first. And one of my favorite example is it's about worker voice that I think every business has responsibility to do. Like it's about the people that work with you, your colleagues. Are you sure that their voices, can they raise concerns with the management and so on? Because there could be risks that there might be abuse and so on. One of the things that we did at Thai Unions, we have HR team actually went into factory floor, production line, and just approach the workers. Because sometimes the workers don't approach the management, but we go approach them, so it's a bit more proactive. I think lesson learned number 2 is like we don't have to do this alone. When we tackle modern slavery or do other activities to promote environmental sustainability, we have to do it with partners. We just can't take the leads. The regulations, the government authorities need to take their roles, enforce laws and regulations. NGOs help to support, reach out to workers. And in the past, some customers also work with us, right? As you can see from digital traceability program and others. Right? And consumers have a role to play to support business that are doing ethical things. So I'll just end it here and just go for any questions from you.
First, thank you for a great talk, and I think Sea Change is a fantastic name, so congratulations on that as well. I had, I guess one basic question is, could you comment on kind of the outcomes so far? Do you have any statistics on what has changed for your company or the industry based on your efforts, or is it too early to try to assess?
It's not too early or not too late because we already start to measure some impacts. For example, our suppliers, almost 100% of suppliers have already signed our code of conduct. If you're talking about the audit of the shrimp farms, I think that has been done for more than 50% already. And issues on those farms are starting to be identified and working on what sort of help that we can provide to these shrimp farmers and suppliers. One of the things that we do, and I think it's a great success, is ethical migrant recruitment policy that I mentioned earlier. It's about what we have done to reduce the risk of debt bondage and excessive recruitment fee. That was done in 2016, and we are almost finished with independent evaluation of that policy. And that evaluation is not done by us, it's done in collaboration with us, so it's completely independent. And that will be published January next year. So, and on other things like, we have separate commitments about tuna, but it's not related to labor, it's about responsible sourcing of tuna. in a way that's certified. So we have commitment to source 100% of our brand tuna to be either MSC certified. So this is some certification scheme on the environmental side, or have to be engaged. Those oceans have to be engaged in fishery improvement projects, and we publish a report on that progress. I can provide you the link over.
I have a question about risk assessment. When you do human rights risk assessment, do you consider Thailand as great, or you consider correct the risk issue from all the countries that you evaluate?
All the countries. So in the latest round of countries, latest rounds of risk assessment, we looked at all the countries. First, that we have factories in, so that include Thailand, other countries like Ghana, Seychelles, and so on. US also part of those. And then we look at the key countries where we source from. And then, because we source from tuna vessels, and that's a bit complicated because the vessels, it's could be originating in these countries, but also shipped in other countries. Like it depends on their flags. We use public information, different tools for particularly for risk assessment for fishery supply chains.
Do you have any challenge on the different local law of each country that related to human rights?
I'm sorry.
Some country maybe the human rights law may be different. Any challenges when you consider that?
So we stick to the code of conduct, our business ethics and labor code of conduct, which I mentioned earlier. So that's our gold standards. And part of that is our factories and also our suppliers have to comply with the law. That's already said in one element of the code of conduct. In addition to that, the issues of forced labor, child labor, they also have to comply with those.
Maybe we have time for one last question.
I love your video about digital traceability, but I can also imagine that a lot of local workers and also sea vessel owners don't have that smartphone or that technology prowess to understand your app or have a smartphone to run that app. Can you tell us about the challenges of implementing a digital program over a very traditional business and how you were able to convince these people to come on board?
On the context of the pilot, it's actually not difficult on the chat application. So I think the video shows that workers have access to chat applications that is connected to the satellite at sea. Right? And I think phone penetration rate is actually already quite high for migrant workers. And we know this because our factories also hire a lot of migrant workers and they use smartphones. Maybe more, I don't know, maybe more the Android than the iOS. That was self-assessment first.